This conference will now be recorded.
Welcome everyone to the June 24th, 2021 meeting of the Thurston Conservation District Board of Supervisors. This meeting is being recorded for posterity and later use. With us this evening, we have Supervisors Betsy DeVreda, Doug Rushton, Helen Wheatley. We have our Executive Director, Sarah Moorhead. We have staff members Susan Shelton and Leah Kellogg. We have Associate Supervisor Chris Stearns, and we have Robin Buckingham from NRCS, as well as our counsel Ben Cushman from Deschutes Law Group. I don't see David Ayal, Supervisor Ayal yet, but I would expect he would be joining us. So welcome everyone to the meeting. First up here is agenda review. Are there any proposed changes from either staff or the board? Not hearing any. I'm going to propose a couple of different changes here. On our consent agenda, I would like to pull items 3A and 3C and handle those separately immediately after the consent agenda. I would also like to move our executive session to discuss the performance of the executive director to the final item on our agenda, so it would be right after item 13, the executive director's report. And if there is
So moved.
with,
Do we need to move that? Okay, sorry.
Yes. So,
moved.
Thank you, Helen. I can't see faces here, so but thank you. It's been moved to approve the revised agenda by Helen. Do I have a second?
I second it.
Second.
Seconded by Betsy. Thank you. We will do a roll call vote. Helen?
Aye.
Betsy?
Aye.
Doug?
Aye.
And chair votes aye, so we have approved a revised agenda. Next up is our consent agenda. There are 3 items that remain on consent agenda. May 11th, 2021 work session minutes, the WSCC master contract, and the Zangle Cove bulkhead removal project. Is there a motion on our consent agenda?
I move to approve the consent agenda.
Moved by Betsy. Is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by Helen. Roll call vote on the motion. Betsy?
Aye.
Helen?
Aye.
Doug?
Aye.
And chair votes aye. So we've approved consent agenda. Now we'll take up the 2 items I pulled from consent, the first being the May 27th board meeting minutes. The only reason I pulled that is that I am going to abstain from voting on that because I was not present at that meeting, and I don't like to vote on minutes for meetings I was not present at. So with that, if someone would like to make a motion to approve those minutes.
I so move.
Moved by Betsy. Is there a second?
I second.
Seconded by Helen. Roll call vote. Betsy?
Aye.
Helen?
Aye.
Doug?
Aye.
And I vote to abstain on that item. So we have approved the minutes with 3 aye votes and 1 abstention. That takes us to 4B, the June 2021 financial report. I pulled that one because I'm hoping we can get a little bit more explanation, both for the board, but also for the public, about that $40,000 loss that showed up in the last monthly statement. So I gave Sarah a heads up on that earlier today, just thinking we should have a little more detail on that. So with that, Susan, are you the person that can walk us through that explanation?
Yes, I'm happy to. So
The report that is showing that loss is on page 3 of the financial statement. So it's the profit and loss for the month of May. And if you scroll down, you'll see that there's a negative $40,754.36. So most months we operate at a loss. But overall, year to date, you'll see that we've operated, if you look on page 2, we have a profit of $68,579 for the entire year. And the reason why this happens is that we get these big chunks of money in November and in May for from the rates and charges. So that's how we can sustain our cash flow, is by those big chunks of money that we get in May and November. This is also the reason why I'm so conservative when it comes to our cash flow and our cash flow analysis, to make sure that we have enough money in our checking account to cover those losses for those other months when we operate at a loss. Is that clear enough
That's
for people?
clear to me, and that's exactly what I was hoping we could put on the record. Are there any other questions about that financial report from board members? Okay, hearing none.
I have a clarification. We should clarify that when it shows a profit, it doesn't mean profit. It means operating surplus or something like that. Just for clarity, because we're not a profit organization.
Right.
Thank you, Ben. It's an operating surplus. Thank you for the clarification. Leah, do you have a question? Go ahead.
TJ, I don't know if this has been discussed, but you're very, very quiet and I'm struggling to hear you. I don't know if anyone else is dealing with that, but just wanted to.
Thank you. It has been mentioned. I'm not sure what to do about it. I have my microphone all the way up and I'm almost shouting into it. So.
Yeah, I'm able to hear you fine now.
Okay, great.
Yeah, me too.
Okay, if it continues to be a problem, let me know. Okay, I will also note at this point that if there are no further questions on the financial report, I'll note that Supervisor Ayal has joined us as well. And we are now ready to act on that financial report if there's a motion to approve it.
I move to approve the.
So moved.
Okay, I think Betsy got there first, so I'll take yours, Doug, as a second. So moved by Betsy, seconded
Okay.
by Doug. So we'll do a roll call vote on that. Betsy?
Aye.
Doug?
Aye.
Helen?
Aye.
David?
Aye.
And chair votes aye. So we have approved the June financial report. Thank you. Takes us to item 5.
Good job, Susan.
Takes us to item 5, public comment. This is a time for any member of the public to address the Board of Supervisors. I don't really see any member of the public on our meeting here today, but I will stop here for the opportunity. If there's anyone that wishes to address the board at this point, this is your opportunity.
Hey, how are you doing? This is Chris Stearns. On that last financial statement, also, whenever any federal grant or state source of money comes in, it's usually paid in advance, not always, but usually. So some of the surplus money could explain that discrepancy. At least that's happened in the past. I don't know if they're still dispersing funds in the same manner.
Thank you. So I'll ask again, any member of the public that wishes to address the board? Seeing and hearing none, I will close public comment and we will move to item 6, our partner reports. First up is the Department of Ecology. Elena Reynolds I don't see Elena on the call here. We did get something in writing earlier. Sarah, do you know if she was planning to be here tonight?
I have not heard either way that she was planning to attend, but we did get that written report in the packet.
Okay, so we will assume at this point that that is the Department of Ecology report for this month, and then we will move on. Next, we had Jean Fike, but I also don't see Jean here for the State Conservation Commission report.
Yes, Jean is unable to attend. I think something came up this afternoon and she's not able to be here. If there are any questions of the commission, I'm happy to take those and relay them to her.
Could we also ask her to maybe send us an email update of what she would have told us had she been here?
Sure, absolutely.
Okay, great. Thank you. Then that takes us to Doug. WACD, NACD, we had a written report for each of those. Is
Yep.
there anything further you want to add, Doug?
You skipped NRCS.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm looking at the printed agenda in front of me, and it's different than the one on the screen here. So the one that came out in our packet. So I'm sorry about that. Let's go back to NRCS. And hello, Robin. I didn't mean to slight you there. Just working from different agendas here. So do you have an update for us tonight?
Yeah, certainly. Can everybody hear me all right?
Just fine.
All right. Well, happy belated Juneteenth. All of us federal employees enjoyed a new federal holiday on last Friday, and hope everybody else took that opportunity as well to celebrate a great day in our history. I think I had a request the last time I was here to kind of give more broad perspective of the agency and directions that it is headed under new leadership. So I'll try and work that in a little bit tonight. Obviously, not going to speak directly for the secretary by any means, but just share some things that have come through my inbox in the past month or two that may be interesting to the folks on this call. First one is just kind of a general note that we have a new chief of NRCS who was appointed effective May 24th, Terry Cosby. He was the state conservationist over in Ohio, and he'd been previously in the acting role of chief since the administration changeover in January. And kind of amazingly, he's been with the agency since 1979, so over 40 years of service with the NRCS. Really, really cool, great story. Really encourage folks to go on our website and read his bio. He's got a great background, and I think it's going to be a great captain of the ship of NRCS. With that, USDA did announce around the same time, I've got May 21st written down here in my notes, that they were beginning a loan repayment program for socially disadvantaged farmers and ranchers. Socially disadvantaged folks are part of a broader group of historically underserved communities that we use in a lot of USDA programming. Our EQIP, or Environmental Qualities Incentive Program, has, for instance, additional payment rate benefits for folks who are either low income, veterans, beginning farmer and rancher, or the socially disadvantaged category as well. And so, yeah, there's increased opportunity for folks who have had loans through USDA to be able to get some assistance in paying those back down. And then just here recently, also around that same time frame in the end of May, we had a 90-day status report on what the administration and the agency is calling climate smart agriculture and forestry practices, which obviously has a lot of tie-in with our agency in particular. Interesting read. You can find it. I'm happy to send out an email as well that I already drafted up with some links to these stories and other updates, because I do think it is interesting reading and good insight to direction at the department level and beyond. So with that, I'll bring it a little bit closer to home. Exciting news for us in the South Sound area is we have a programmatic biological assessment with U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service and ourselves that will be covering, I believe, all of the threatened and endangered prairie species that we have within our geographic region. And this is going to be a huge help for delivering programs and improving kind of customer experience with our programs. In the past, we have been stuck, I shouldn't say stuck, part of our national environmental policy responsibilities are protecting threatened and endangered species. And so whenever we have a project that could potentially impact those species, we have to go through a biological assessment and opinion consultation process with U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. And a good process, definitely make sure that we are protecting the species, can also take quite a bit of time to go through each one of those consultations individually. And so this programmatic biological assessment will cover all of our programs for the next 5 years and kind of get all of that work out of the way ahead of time, which is really exciting. I think it's going to really help us get some more conservation on the ground and also potential to bring partners in underneath that programmatic as well if we're working together on a project. So some good potential there as well. Some updates on the things that I included in my email from last month when I wasn't able to attend. We still have a pending deadline for our Healthy Forest Reserve program through the Southwest Washington Forestry RCPP. It's a really cool opportunity. That Healthy Forest Reserve program is only offered through Regional Conservation Partnership Programs, RCPPs, which that Southwest Washington Forestry one is. And one of the rare opportunities for conservation easements on forest lands. So there is a geographic constraint to it, and mostly the partners who are involved in that RCPP, Thurston Conservation District being one of them, Mason and Grace Harbor and the surrounding conservation districts as well as DNR and WSU are getting that word out to folks and getting interest in the program. But if you know any forest landowners who may be interested in learning more, I'm happy to route them appropriately if they need a contact. And then our conservation stewardship program pre-approvals have been announced. We had one application here in Thurston County that was funded. Again, that program's just kind of still building back up. We haven't really fully utilized it here on the west side in the past, and I've had some program changes that make it so it's easier to play with over here. So excited to at least start to get a little bit of interest in that program as well. But EQIP is Environmental Qualities Incentive Program has wrapped up. Our contracting process is done for fiscal year 21, and we'll be looking forward to our next sign up, which has not been announced yet. I'll be sure to send that out as soon as I get more information. I think that's all I've got on my list, unless folks have any questions for me.
I have a couple of questions.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
I have two questions of Robin and one question of the board. First question for you, Robin, is on your programmatic. Does that also include FSA under that, or is that just in our CS program?
Ooh, good question. And I don't know the answer to that, to be honest with you. I'd have to check.
Yeah, absolutely. Convoluted things. we can follow up offline on that. The other piece of that is, so Jeff Swotek approached the board, years ago, having conversation about this in relation to prairie species. So those board members that were here might remember some of that conversation. On those partnership opportunities to include that coverage, is there a specific percentage of project funding or something that NRCS needs to be providing to that project? We have a similar relationship with U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service and their partner for Fish and Wildlife Program, but I'm just curious how your programmatic is written.
Yeah, that's a really good question. And I don't know that I actually completed my thought when I brought this topic up. So it's not actually implemented as yet. It has been signed on our side and sent off to U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, and hopefully will be finalized here within the next 120 days, I think is the timeline. So we will probably have a rollout of the programmatic when, confetti will be raining from the ceiling, and everybody will have fancy hats and all that stuff. Everybody will be really celebrating, I think, what's been 6 years of work to get to this point. But the short answer is, I don't know that we have, a percentage. We have to be 50% involved at this point to be able to share with partners of when they can enjoy the coverage of that programmatic as well.
Yeah, that would be really helpful if there is any specific parameters around that, since we do a lot of collaborative work within NRCS on landowner properties, and I foresee that continuing to increase, especially with the work that we're doing in the Sentinel landscape. So I'll follow up with you after that final official sign off from U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. So thank you so much, Robin. And then the question I have for the board is, it's been a while, I think, since we had sort of an overview presentation from NRCS about the different types of programs that Robin gives these great updates on. And I'm just curious from the board, and you don't have to answer now, it can be something we discuss in a future work session, but if you'd be interested in a more in-depth presentation about the specifics of these programs and what exactly they do in the community. I think it's helpful to be able to share them with your friends and neighbors when you really understand those tools and how they're used. And then you can also see some of the synergies and how we plug and play and partner as a district. So that's something, again, you don't have to answer now, but that might be great since we have a lot of new faces.
Well, Sarah, I am going to answer now, actually, because I think that fits very well with the issue we talked about at our last work session about getting more presentations from partner organizations and community organizations that we work with. So in my mind, that's a natural work session topic to hear more and get a little bit more in depth than NRCS. And it would just be a matter of plugging it into our work session schedule, since we've already said we want to do those things.
Perfect. Robin, I'll follow up with you to see when you're available to have some more conversation about NRCS programs.
Sounds great.
Anything further from the board for Robin? Okay. Thank you, Robin. Thanks for being here. Thanks for the update. And especially looking forward to those links that you mentioned on the climate work and some of the other pieces. I'd really like to do some of that reading too. So thanks for sending those along.
Yeah, I'll be sure to send that out here shortly. Thanks.
Great. Okay, that then brings us back to 6D and 6E. WACD, NACD, as I said previously, we had the written reports from Doug. Do you have anything to add to your written reports, Doug?
Yes, I do, to both reports, and I would concur with your views on having an RCS give us an overview. That would be good. We had a 6/21 WACD board meeting basically on two topics, the budget and the evaluation of the executive director. The good news is we're keeping Tom Salzer. Everyone is pretty ecstatic about the job he's doing and happy with it. The other news is, and this is good news as well, there's a $1.8 million amount in reserves. And what we're going to do with that is reduce the WACD dues for districts. We don't have a big problem with Thurston paying that, but some of the small, relatively insolvent districts do. So that's coming down the pike. It'll be more information to follow. And the last item for WACD that's in addition to the report is if anybody wants to buy a Lincoln that the WACD owns, it's for sale. I've had it stored at my house for about 6 months. It smells like mouses inside it. pretty disturbing. My first impression was, why does WACD have a Lincoln? But that's a different story. So any questions on WACD? Okay, hearing none, I'll move on to NACD. At the end of July, the NACD is going to have its annual meeting in Chicago, as I noted. It'll be the first in-person meeting since last February. One of the interesting parts of all this is that federal employees haven't been cleared to go to in-person meetings yet, so the attendance is still questionable, but I'm sure that'll get worked out. Then lastly, the preparations for the Southwest/Pacific region meetings of NACD are going on hot and heavy. We've got the agenda developed. It'll be at the end of July in Jackson, Wyoming, and registration for that opened today. And if anybody has any questions on NACD stuff, I'd be glad to answer. And at some point, I'd like to give an overview of how NACD interacts with WACD and individual districts and kind of what we do.
Doug, just for clarification, you said the meeting in Jackson, Wyoming was at the end of July. On our agenda, it's noted as August 30th and 31st.
Yeah, I think that agenda's right. I got the other meeting in Chicago is at the end of July. Okay. Thank you for catching that.
Yep, thanks for clarifying. Okay, anything else for Doug from the board? If not, we will move on from partner reports to item 7, the COVID-19 update, and specifically the reopening plan, which Sarah introduced to us at our last work session and which is scheduled for action this evening.
Yeah, thank you, TJ. So the chat or the on-screen version here is the same as you saw in your packet. I'm going to zoom in a little bit so we can see it better, with the addition of the yellow highlighted text in here. This was after legal review occurred, and this sentence was added about this protocol being subject to change as all of the guidance and information sources that we follow are updated. So I thought that was a great piece. Thank you, Ben, for that. Otherwise, the majority of the document continues to remain the same as was presented. I had a great conversation with our staff at our staff meeting about this, and they brought forth a lot of great information to include or thoughts to include in this process as we were scoping and thinking about this. The one item that I did want to call your attention to in the document, or two items, excuse me, are this item here, oops, on page 2, guidance around staff members attending community or partner meetings. Will be asked to follow the guidelines and recommendations of those local locations that are hosting the meetings. That is a given there, but wanted to make sure that that was in there, noting that some entities might have additional restrictions on participation. Also, if the meeting is offered virtual or in person, that staff are able to participate in the manner that they feel most comfortable participating. And then a component on the community access piece, and this is reflected on page 1. Oops. Just making sure that staff members, it's noted that staff members are not responsible for verifying or confirming community members' vaccination status. So we have all of the mentioned signage and information up here, but making sure that it's clear that staff members are not being put in that position as sort of the gatekeeper of the district and doing any specific sort of checks. That was a big point of conversation that arose from the staff about wanting to make sure that they were not in any sort of potentially confrontational role with having to do additional screening beyond what was already listed in this protocol, and having that sort of assurance piece for liability reasons mostly. So those are the only two sort of adjustments that came out of the staff conversation. And I'm happy to take any additional questions or thoughts from the board on this. Otherwise, this is the final draft with legal review that's recommended for your considered approval.
Okay,
I have a
so thank you,
question.
Sarah. Go ahead, Betsy.
Well, should there be a date as to when we're going to start this?
Yeah, so the pending the board's approval, I would plan to start it July 1, so making it effective on July 1. The protocol will go into effect or be approved as soon as the board approves it, or authorized, I should say, but for communication with the community, giving them a little bit of support in that, July 1 is a nice round number for people to understand. So that would be the marketing communications we would share.
Mr. Chair, I have a question.
Go ahead, Doug.
Am I safe in assuming, Sarah, that Ben has looked at this after staff made changes or recommended changes?
Yes, that's correct.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. I think the changes are good. I think it looks good.
Well, if there are no further comments or questions, I will entertain a motion on this protocol.
I so move that we pass the TCD in-person work protocol.
Second.
Been moved by Betsy and seconded by David. We'll do a roll call vote here. Betsy?
Aye.
David?
Aye.
Doug?
Aye, and I like Betsy's idea of putting a date on it so we can have an effective date.
Helen?
Aye.
And chair votes aye. I agree with putting a date in the document. So we have approved the TCD in-person work protocol effective July 1st.
Just as a reference to state agencies are starting to open up August, September, and October.
Thank you, Chris. Okay, we've approved the COVID protocol. That moves us to, because we've moved our executive session and report out to the end of our meeting, the next item up on our agenda is Citizens Advisory Committee update.
Yeah, and so this is a great time for the board to also have some conversation about the upcoming deadline. We have received one application for the Citizens Advisory Committee this week that was sent to the board earlier today. Staff are continuing to do additional outreach around this. I know supervisors are as well. The current cutoff date is June 30th. And so after that date, you know, any additional applications received will be shared with the board. This might be a prime topic for the July work session to review and discuss any of those recommendations, or if there have not been sufficient applications received to talk about other approaches that the board would like to see happen regarding the committee then, as well as some sort of onboarding timeline and process.
Okay, thank you, Sarah. I recall, I think at our last work session that we said we were going to definitely put this on the July work session topic list to review the application we'd received and consider whether or not to extend or modify the deadline. So I recall talking about that. I'll also offer that I've talked to 2 people who have assured me that they intend to apply, neither of whom have apparently turned in their application yet, but as of earlier this week, there's at least 2 more people planning to apply.
I would add that I've received interest or inquiries from an additional, about 3 other folks, in addition to the person that did submit their application. So I think that, as usual, we'll probably see a little bit of a surplus of interest right at the end of the timeline.
Any other comments or thoughts from the board on this topic? Okay, hearing none, I guess we'll wait and see what happens over the next week, and we'll revisit this at our July work session and figure out where we go from there. That then moves us on to item 10, the Conservation and Education Center, and some pieces there, updates on contracts, and some feedback that Sarah needs from the board this evening.
Yeah, thank you. I'm really looking forward to some good discussion on this agenda item. I was had a great meeting with Tom Beckwith of Beckwith Consulting Group late last week regarding the cost proposal that was submitted to the board for the various elements of the feasibility study that were proposed. And I have some updates to share with you based on my conversation with Tom. And then I also have some various points of information that I'd love to collect and share back with Tom. Ultimately, the main sentiment of our meeting together was that we're sort of in a scope refinement phase of this contract negotiation, where as we continue to refine the scope that is desired within that proposal, we'll be able to refine the budget as well. All of the budget items and elements are scalable, to meet the expectations of the scope of work. So if the board wants to see a more robust outreach in a certain area, the cost would be adjusted appropriately, or if there's a flexibility to include more virtual meetings and less in-person meetings, that's a definite cost difference there too. So we can talk about some of those components, and I'll pull up that budget proposal in just a minute. The other piece I wanted to mention was the building RFP. The property RFP cost that was quoted is one that Beckwith Consulting Group mentioned can be included in a separate scope of work or a separate cost quote. So this can be sort of a 2-part piece. And based on the responses that are received in that. So there can be a provision of our contract to include that item to be quoted separately in addition to. And so, sorry, monitoring the chat. So if we don't get a lot of responses to that RFP, then that would decrease the cost. If we get a robust amount of responses and the board wants to investigate a lot of options generated from that, that would increase the cost. So that's certainly scalable there. The other piece that I wanted to mention too is there's a 2% sort of contingency that Tom mentioned that he typically asks to be included in addition on the contracts, just to allow for additional refinement. If we say we want to do 2 outreach meetings with the community and we find that 3 are really needed, we have some flexibility for, I guess, emergent design and adaptation of the scope as we move forward, that allows us to move rather quickly rather than a more formalized amendment process. And so those are some of the things that I wanted to make sure that the board was aware of there. So let me see here. I'm pulling up the initially quoted sort of schedule and budget proposal. I'll zoom in again so we can see that better. The highlighted sections in particular, as you can see, are ones that I highlighted myself to have some specific questions or conversation with Tom on, just about the extent of some of these pieces, thinking that these might be areas of cost savings for the district. Conducting these progress workshops and retreats under 1A, 64 hours of labor, how much really goes into that piece. And so that's one of the sort of feedback points from the board that they're looking for, is how often do you want the consulting group to come and meet, potentially in person with anyone, to do physical outreach meetings with the community, or to do physical meetings with the board. And I think to some degree, some of this will be up in the air as we progress on this with the changing guidance. And right now the board is meeting virtually. So, but this is a hefty amount based on regular in-person meetings and coming down for that. The other pieces are some of the review components of other conservation and education centers, compiling some of that data, as well as doing some of the interview components here. I think we have some models out there that of similar organizations. I think of what Tom Salzer presented in terms of the Clackamas Soil and Water Conservation District, brand new building with demonstration sites. We've talked in the past at the board level about Kitsap Conservation District's demonstration sites. Spokane is building a building. So there are other people that are known that are out there. And it's some of that legwork of finding these pieces for reference that really cut some of that cost down. And that's a piece that we'll sort of jump into next, is reviewing some of the priorities of that information and some of the feedback, especially about local opportunities and local partners, that will help to save costs, but also provide some direction and help Tom revise and update that scope of work. So I'll pause here for a minute. I'd love to hear if the board has any specific thoughts around sort of the budget allocation or the scope of this piece before we move into that refinement exercise.
Well, this is Helen. I guess I'll just jump in. So could you clarify, Sarah? It sounds like you're saying that part of the expense of the interviews with key staff and stakeholders for both of those parts, is really travel expenses. And I mean, that was my sense of what you were saying, is that that's a significant part of the cost, and it's somewhat negotiable based on whether to have in-person versus virtual meetings. Am I wrong in that understanding?
You're partially right, Helen. And so 1A, the conduct retreats and progress workshops, is estimated and billed at an in-person rate for those for those 4 instances that you can see here in months 1 through 4. The scalability of, for example, interviewing key Conservation Education Center staff and stakeholders pieces is just based on how many people is that? How many people are they talking to individually versus collectively? You know, for example, if Beckwith Consulting met with all of our team leads at the conservation district in one meeting in 1 hour, that's you know 1 hour's worth of time versus meeting with each individual staff member, or having individual phone call interviews with each of these other conservation district or conservation and education center like buildings, you know, is one cost. You know, versus taking a lot of the feedback that we might already have compiled, or that, you know, I think in particular, Tom and Vicky have a lot of this information already written in these reports, you know, and how much of it can be gleaned via that. So that's some of the scalability and the direction that I think they're looking for is, you know, what are our targets? You know, to what extent do you want us to do this additional analysis? You know, do you want them to talk to 3 other conservation education centers, you know, or 10? And that's the scalability for that one.
Well, I had a real brief question on that one too, if I may, and that was just, I have a recollection, I'm wondering if this is what you were partly talking about, that there was some example that they were interested in that was out of state, as I recall. But I don't have notes on it, so I'm just working from memory. But it seemed to me, I seem to recall that they had something maybe on the East Coast that they felt was very appropriate. Am I wrong about that?
No, they
Yeah.
did bring up a variety of examples, and some were back east and some were regional. The process there would be, they would say, this is the list of other centers that we are planning to interview. Do you approve? Should we add some? Should we take some off? And so there would be decision points and direction points from the district, you know, at all of those steps. So you can say, no, that's really not relevant to what we're looking for, or yes, please do.
Okay, yeah, well, I guess that was the question. I mean, if it was something that they really thought was appropriate, I'd be a bit reluctant to take it off if, you know, if it really seemed necessary. But if it's, we can make that decision. If we can include it, but take it off later, I guess that might be good.
And I think we can still build our budget around some flexibility too, you know, if the board wants to see, you know, 4 to 6 comparisons, or, you know, as an example, and sort of leave some of that in the process, you know, to unfold as we move through the actual study. I think we can still use some of those ballparks rather than absolutes. I think that Thomas is trying to get a handle on how robust do you want each of these elements. And, you know, I did tell him that to some degree, we would like to hear what your professional judgment is, as somebody who conducts these feasibility studies, you know, for other groups, to make some of those recommendations. So that's also a point where there's additional detail that, you know, I'm happy to take on as much of as the board feels comfortable in delegating some of that level of detailed refinement, or we can continue to do that as a Conservation Education Center subcommittee, or continue to bring them to these public meetings and work sessions as well. So I'm really happy to support you however you'd like to see that happen.
I have a couple of thoughts on that. In terms of the number of other things to look at, Sarah, you identified 3 specific ones that we've talked about in the past: Kitsap, Spokane, and the project down in Oregon. And those are really direct comparisons for me. But I would think it would be interesting, using his professional opinion, if he knows of some things that maybe aren't in our wheelhouse, that might be relevant to spend a little bit of time investigating them. I mean, this is a humongous project potentially, and I think getting a good sense of what the options might be at the beginning is, for me, it's worth spending a little bit more money on. I don't want to go and look at like a dozen, but maybe the 3 we know, get more detail on, and maybe 3 more or something like that. I'd be comfortable with that. The other thought I had is that I would like to see our subcommittee, I guess that's David and Betsy, continue to kind of work closely with you on some of these details, and use the board more as a check-in, and just because I think it'll be more streamlined if there's fewer number of people just trying to keep this process moving along than waiting for board meetings or work sessions and having to go through it as a larger group. So I'm personally very comfortable delegating some of the board's power to the committee to work with you on this. I don't know how other board members feel.
I think that would be a good idea. There's a lot of, opinions that the whole group could have and really kind of drag these board meetings out. If we could do the smaller group sessions, I think we could get a lot more accomplished.
Is there any member of the board that would object to continuing to have this subcommittee work on more of the details with reporting back to us at frequent at our board meetings or work sessions?
It sounds
Okay,
good.
Okay.
I would point out that.
Go ahead, Doug.
I would point out that I mentioned to Sarah a couple times about the Teos, New Mexico Soil and Water Conservation District built a new building about 18 months ago, maybe 2 years. That might be another one that's out of the region. And my recollection was it was one that we would like and would fit our needs, and they had demonstrations and the whole thing, kind of like what we're thinking about. So Teos, New Mexico.
Okay, so it sounds like the board has said, yes, go forth as a subcommittee and continue to work on details. Sarah, is there anything else you need on this piece before you kind of work us through the next section of this topic?
I think, oops, excuse me. I'm moving my cameras around. I don't want to close out on the meeting though. That's exactly what I was hoping for, is to have the subcommittee sort of continue at that level of detail and doing the scope refinement. I'll be looking to meet with the subcommittee, ideally in the next week or so that we can refine some of these pieces and get that back to Tom so he can update the cost analysis proposal, the cost proposal you see here, and share that back with the board. Definitely, those sort of budget considerations that the board has for a total threshold would also be really helpful. And so we can see what that second proposal looks like. If the board has any other specific comments or thoughts around, a maximum dollar amount that you're looking to allocate towards this project, we can also scale the study components within that piece too. So there's sort of 2 ways of going about that, and I just want to make sure that we're staying on track with our timeline and getting this project started, and also doing what's best for the budget. And I will just mention, highlighting on the screen here, that it's this property RFP component, which is the most substantial cost in the line item on this budget, is the one that Tom is saying can happen in sort of a phase 2 depending on responses. So that's a hefty consideration for the board.
Am I correct that we will be looking at our mid-year budget review next month at either the work session or the board meeting?
Yes, we'll do our sort of first pass introduction at the work session, and then revise with any board feedback and revisions in time for the July meeting if the board would like to consider approval.
Okay, so that sounds good to me. And where I was going with that is, I think if the committee could spend a little time on this over the next couple of weeks, and we could see our mid-year budget numbers at the July work session, I think that would put us in a pretty good position to identify a not to exceed number for this contract. And allow us the flexibility potentially to move some things around in our budget if we need to.
That sounds like a great approach. Thank you.
Yeah, I'd concur with that. I do commend Sarah for putting this together and asking the right questions and thinking about stuff that makes sense. Sarah, are there any particular questions or recommendations you'd have to the board that we haven't asked?
I think, thank you for that, Doug, and I appreciate that. This is certainly a learning opportunity for all of us moving forward. So I think the next phase of looking into sort of known opportunities, potential opportunities, and ideas is really how I have the next discussion framework created. And talking about partnerships is really going to be helpful additional direction for the subcommittee to help refine that scope of work. So at this point, at this time, I think that's going to be really helpful. And I will also say, I definitely appreciate the thoroughness and thoughtfulness and expertise of the subcommittee board members that we have that have a lot of expertise in this area. It's been a great safety net moving forward. So yeah, I think this next exercise is going to answer those questions that we need at this time.
Well, then maybe it's time to move on to that exercise.
Perfect. If there's no more questions there, so this is just a draft that I've started to populate a framework for, as I mentioned in my report in the board packet. One of the questions, sort of scoping questions that Tom asked for is, are there sites that the board or the district has already identified as potentials? And so I've organized this in a way of sort of known opportunities. The district has been courted more heavily at some times than others by some of our partners and some of our partnerships. We actually went out and toured, the Tenino Ag Business Park as a potential site. That's a known opportunity that still exists. Other potential opportunities that have already been identified are potentially the Vets Cafe farm that Doug and I actually toured several years ago, and we haven't, connected with them recently about that, but there's some infrastructure in need of renovation out there and a lot of space. The city of Lacey also had an opportunity at one point with an agricultural property that they acquired and some management there. That opportunity was loosely talked about several years ago as well. And then there's a lot of things happening with the city of Olympia and the Zahn parcel. Currently, Spooner Berry Farm is leasing that piece. But yeah, there's a lot of things in the works on that. So those are other more recent opportunities that there's been some conversation about the district. And then other site ideas, and this was just an initial list. Other City of Olympia owned properties, their Parks Department is, and their City Council members, or the ones that we've met with on farmland preservation work, seem interested in a partnership potentially. Our local land trusts, we have the Community Farmland Trust as well as Capital Land Trust that have a lot of properties, both habitat and working lands, and mixes of those, of course, that there might be a potential opportunity to explore a partnership on. I know that providing maintenance and management of those parcels that land trusts acquired is always a challenge for them, and so that might be an area of great benefit. The Port of Olympia too, I think, the board mentioned at the last meeting to make sure was included in this list, and I think rightfully so. There's a lot of port-owned property out there, and especially centrally located in the county, that there could be a partnership explored. And I think we should also keep in mind retiring agricultural producers. Is there a way we can further our mission and keep working lands in production? Or in addition to, there's been a lot of conversation about transforming, rocky prairie into non-habitat uses, around logistics centers and things. So that's another great example of, could we save rocky prairie, put with a conservation education center, but a lot of protection for the majority of it. So these are some ideas that I've generated, but I'd love to hear other thoughts and ideas or reactions to these on the list from the board.
Anyone have any thoughts?
Well, I'm not familiar with some of these, especially the potential opportunities list. I mean, I'm not familiar with the properties for Vets Cafe or City of Lacey, but is the Vets Cafe farm, is that sort of in the Lacey area then, roughly, or where is it?
Yeah, no, this one is also sort of north of Tenino, south of Tumwater area,
Okay.
on the other side of the freeway, kind of from Maytown. And it's right along I-5, so there is definitely some highway frontage. I'm happy to pull up a map of that too. It'll take me a minute, but I'm happy to do that if you'd like, or send that information out additionally. There's a variety of somewhat dilapidated infrastructure on there, but there's a veterans training program that's been underway out there. And they've been doing a lot of reclamation and rehabilitation of some of the wetlands in that area that I think it was a former maybe poultry operation had used more as drainage. They're old settling and drainage ponds from old, many decades ago operations. And so they're doing a lot of reclamation with Department of Ecology of those wetland spaces.
Yeah, that's a good description. It was actually a rabbit butchery.
Oh.
And there would be a lot of work, and dilapidated, I think, is being generous.
Well,
Go ahead, Helen.
Well, I just wanted to say, I mean, my general feeling, but there's cost and opportunity, all sorts of things to think about. But my general feeling is still something that we've talked about often, and that is accessibility. I mean, when I think of something like, the Yelm property right off of Yelm Highway, that's very accessible. As an education center. I keep mentioning that it's a balance because the population center is the North County, and I suppose part of the question that we have to work out is how important that element is as far as the educational component of the facility. But on the other hand, I feel like the most important thing that the facility needs to do is be able to accommodate growth of all the staff and the conservation work that needs to be done. And so there's an argument for locating it somewhere that is convenient for staff to get their work done. So I don't know. Those are both things to think about.
I was thinking about that too, and one way we could approach this is we have this list that Sarah's given us, and we could probably put a lot more other things on there just in terms of a brainstorm dump, either now or in the future. But I would think that one of the early on meetings with our consultant team, and probably the first time we meet with them as a board, we ought to really hone in on what the site criteria is, both in terms of access and function of the site. So that they have that from the get-go, particularly as we start to, if we go through this RFP process where people who have land come to us, that would be a really easy way to filter out which ones are worth looking at, which ones aren't worth looking at, which then dovetails back to Sarah's point about maybe keeping the costs down on that RFP process. So looking at it from a site criteria, site function perspective might be a way to kind of get a handle on this.
Yeah, I think filtering criteria is a good idea. In addition to other site ideas, I'd put the county on there too. They may have some property that they could lease us for $1 a year or something, or have a facility, a transportation type facility that they're going to change. I mean, we talked with them years ago about that, but unsuccessfully.
And I'll note that
Well,
I
I
saw
certainly
Sarah.
like the Scatter Creek Land Trust property. It doesn't meet the accessibility component, but it's a great site, and there's space there, and there are other things happening there that might, draw people down there more. And I do think, as far as a bus line or something like that, I want to hope that they're going to reinstate some of the public transportation options that used to exist to South County.
Well, that all depends on whether the residents of South County want to tax themselves for that benefit, because that's the only way it can be expanded.
I would like to see us really pursue the opportunities with the city of Olympia. That'd be my ultimate goal. I think this definitely is part two, though, as far as our getting this. I think working with our consultants here, developing, what we want as a group should come first, and then start working on this property as maybe a phase two, as their number 4 is compare acquisition and ownership scenarios.
Yeah, this is really helpful feedback to discuss sort of the timeline and approach and what needs to happen moving forward. I think the subcommittee can take some of this and talk about sort of the breadth of these pieces, and that the board really would like to see some more of this criteria identified and defined as a first step of the feasibility study, which will dictate the rest. And I think TJ's approach to a not to exceed amount will give us some of that flexibility in this piece to do more due diligence and work where the board would like to see it, and save costs where the board would like to see it as well. I think, for reference, if I may, one of the things about the district that I think is important to keep in mind, which may not be the case in the future, is we are typically a destination space. People are coming to us with intent on participating in a service or an opportunity or a program. We don't get, and it could be by virtue of our location, which is not ideal, drop in or walk in individuals. It's folks that are coming to us for a specific reason. I think that's important to think about as we're weighing, do we want to have more demonstration sites, or do more space for that, or do we want to be in a more populated space, that might have more access? That's been our historical norm.
This is Helen again. Just in terms of, going forward and sort of developing those criteria better. I mean, I think for me as a board member, I would benefit from having a better sense of what staff criteria and needs are, in order to be able to include that in the evaluation process.
We do have that. We have a document that Sarah put together.
All right.
I'd just like to make a comment on what Sarah just said. As far as being a destination, people go specifically to the conservation district where it's located now, because probably a lot of people don't realize what the conservation district is. Maybe if it's in a more populated area, it gets more notice, and then more people would actually come and use it.
Absolutely.
Related to that, go ahead.
Go ahead, Doug.
Related to what David just said, I sent Sarah a text just a little bit ago, or a chat. There's a building and a little bit of acreage, or I'm not sure how much land, at the north end of the airport, right on Capitol Way, and formerly Air Industrial. I don't know what the name of the street is now. It used to be a Curves place, and I think there was a realtor there at one point. But anyway, just I want to make sure we don't overlook that.
Yeah,
The location is will be really good for us.
yeah. Yeah, I mean, I picture not necessarily that people are going to be walking by it, but at least that they would drive by and see it. You know, very few people would even drive by where we are now.
Well, if they do, they're lost, probably.
Probably.
So there are two other components that I'd love to just bring up briefly to see if there's any immediate reaction, if now is a good time to do so. And seeing nods, one of that is definitely some hefty consideration towards what ownership structure is preferred. That's also going to be another criteria point that I think really refines this list that we have. In the past, again, historically, the district has talked about owning both land and structures on any potential new site, mostly for flexibility of conducting business and demonstrations, but also understanding that at some point public funding would no longer be used for leasing a space, that money would be directed to on-the-ground service and conservation projects. And there might be other really great opportunities that the board wants to consider where we might own structures but not land, or there's a partnership opportunity like I believe Doug mentioned, where we have a $1 99-year lease on a space. So I think that those are some really big considerations as well about that that preferred owner user structure. And adding sort of an additional layer to that too is if the district is in ownership capacity, exploring two-way partnerships with those sort of same group of folks that are noted on your list here. There might be potential users of that space. So if we own property, maybe some smaller NGO partners or land trusts have offices or whatnot, and they're able to come and be co-housed with us and lease space from the district. So that's a lot to take in, and something that we'll definitely tease out through this process. And probably our longer term process, and not holistically in our feasibility study, but starting to think about ownership structure is going to be really important, and that's going to be really important as we get to the financing component of this as well. Any immediate thoughts or questions or comments about that piece, and then I'll sort of wrap up with my last element here.
Yes, on that point, I think that's where looking at these the other models that we talked about, the three that we know about and the others that the consultants might know about, for me, that's one of the key questions in looking at these other ones is what is the ownership structure and why did they choose that particular model, and is it working well for them? And I think, looking at least three, or that we know about, maybe more, we could get a different sense of what the different models are and what are the pros and cons of each of the models, and be able to make an informed decision at some point. My gut always tells me that I want to own, not rent, but there may be really good arguments to the contrary that come up through the research.
Thank you. That is exactly the type of feedback that I was really hoping to hear.
Okay,
If I may interject, you folks gave an option of just owning property without a lot of immense amount of land as one of them. We are vacating an office owned by Harrington as part of our merger with his company 3 years ago, thereabouts. And we leased it with an option to buy. We didn't exercise the option to buy, which meant that we're moving out, I believe, by 22 or pretty soon anyway. And that facility, which he used as a headquarters, is right next to the airport on, the Jackson Road, Capitol Way there, south of Tumwater there, south of Tumwater Square area. And it's a facility that includes a lockup for vehicles so they can be secure, but it's a rather limited parcel. It wouldn't, be I would call it Harrington property rather than our property. We're leasing it right now. So Harrington is with an A.
Thank you, Chris.
Yeah, there you go. And that's right next to the airport. Yeah, and we're ending our lease. So he will either sell it or start leasing it again. It's up to him.
So Sarah, you said you had one more thing you wanted a little input on. I'd like to move to that, and just a few more minutes on this topic, and then we probably need to move on to the other pieces of our agenda. But let's get to the last piece you wanted to talk about.
Yeah, and I just took these notes down, sort of verbatim from what Tom shared, but it's mostly centered around outreach, and doing outreach to some of the user base. It's likely that phone calls, will be the route, or emails or whatnot will be the route that's used to connect with other conservation and education centers around the region or around the nation. But in terms of, there's an item in there about reaching out to the communities that the district serves to see what they would like to see in a conservation education center operated by the district. And now that there were a couple of different thoughts around, hosting virtual meetings and virtual workshops, coming down and hosting in-person facilitated events, things like this. This is an item, to be honest, I think we could go either way on, with the consultant facilitating, with the district facilitating, and the consultant facilitated one would be co-facilitated, with the district and the consultant. It's a time when the board could be, present in those, hear that information directly from the community, and then make those informed decisions. The consultant could provide a master sort of a report of that information for the board as well as part of the process. So that's one piece, and of course that has a cost. The amount of times that they're coming down to meet with individual stakeholders, for example, if we want them to meet with a variety of partners or other local or tribal governments, or having those sort of community listening sessions, that has a different cost. Most immediately, I definitely think that some in-person community listening session for some of our rural community folks that have some accessibility issues with virtual opportunities is a good one, which I think could be mirrored both in North and South County. It seems like the demographics around who's using virtual versus who is having challenge or is reluctant to continue using virtual are pretty clear to us. And so, just making sure that we're hitting both of those populations of folks as we're doing this study, I think is really important. And so having some of that in-person outreach as a component is would be ideal. But I just wanted to hear if there's any thoughts or special considerations that the board has around community-based outreach.
Well, can you, I guess a little clarification, you're talking about as we're doing our conversation about setting parameters? Or are you talking about within the contract? Within the scope of work of the contract?
Yeah, just within the scope of work of the contract, there's a specific line item in there that's about hearing community needs directly from the community and their sort of attitudes and feelings towards this, sort of in lieu of doing like a survey, doing these more focus group style meetings, or if there's specific really important partners or stakeholders that the board identifies they want to make sure is included. You know, we're a huge partner of Thurston County. What does Thurston County want to see us have? You know, who should we talk to and how should we include them? We can certainly have, you know, larger group style virtual meetings, most cost effective, one-on-one conversations or in-person meetings as well. And so some of the scalability there, I think different audiences, different methods and modes of communication are most effective.
Well, one thought, I guess, on that is I'm not a big fan of having a ton of one-on-one conversations because I think it's really hard for the consultant at the end to make sense of having had a whole lot of one-on-one conversations where everything is done in isolation. So I like the focus group approach, and in my brain, there's sort of, I mean, we do a lot of things at the district, but the three kind of buckets that I think would be important to have some group conversation, focus group kind of thing. One would be for just loosely calling them ag people, producers, essentially. The second would be people that we work with around habitat and conservation and restoration. And the third would be our educational component, South Sound Green and the community education kind of piece. And then as you were talking, Sarah, potentially a fourth group would kind of be the county/city, you know, governmental staff people that we partner with on things. But the first three would be the higher priority for me than the agents or than the public sector agency types.
Yeah, that's very helpful.
I would, there might be a refinement there. Education. So are we wrapping into that sort of urban conservation and farming, food growing? Where do we put the urban component?
As I was thinking about it, the food growing, that all comes under the agriculture. When I was thinking about education, I was specifically thinking about the school districts we work with on Project Green and the Congress and those sorts of things.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
But
okay.
Yeah, I would think it would be very important when we do the ag piece, the producer piece, that it is everybody, not just rural, not just urban, but everybody at the table, or representatives of everybody at the table, because I think you get some synergy that way. Sarah, do you feel like you have what you wanted to get from the board tonight and you can work with the committee and the consultant to keep this thing moving forward now?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the direction, you know, and agreement of the subcommittee to tease out a couple more specifics is perfect, and this is a great foundation to work from. I think we're set to move forward with some of the scoping. I appreciate your time tonight on this too.
I do have one last question.
Go ahead.
And that is, has there been any discussion in the subcommittee, or have we kind of previously gone over this, the possibility of splitting it into two pieces so that you know, it might be optimal to have a sort of South County component, and you know, when Chris was sort of talking about, you know, having a facility that would, I could imagine the current configuration of the conservation district moving to where the PUD is now. but it doesn't provide for having demonstration farms or things like that. But especially given the fact that property ain't cheap, it's getting more and more expensive, and especially the closer to the urban center you are. I mean, is there any possibility, or do we want to entertain the possibility of splitting this into two different campuses, if you will?
We actually, a few years back, had a Tenino office too. We didn't get enough traffic though, but maybe time to reevaluate. Maybe things have changed. Worth looking at, I think. And I was wondering why TJ butted in on me when I was talking. It was because I was on mute. I'd make the agriculture broader, because I'd include forestry in that, as you guys probably recognize, and like shellfish and that sort of thing. And under the education, I would put SPSCC and Evergreen and St. Martin's.
The subject of splitting has come up. My concern would be that we'd be adding to our operation costs significantly to manage two sites, because I imagine there'd still be a building at the demonstration site.
Yeah, that theme has come up over the years as well about that, and we had gosh, at least 5 or more years ago, some pretty robust conversation, I think both at the staff level, and I believe that conversation also occurred at the board level. I was not involved at that level at that time. But in addition to increasing operating costs and maintenance and management costs, we have a fairly small staff that is highly collaborative. And a lot of the work we do, because it's so holistically focused on the landscapes and the projects, relies on that synergy and collaboration. I think it would be potentially detrimental to our internal staff culture and collaboration, but also to the delivery of some of our programs and services that rely on those pieces. I would also say that our programs and services aren't split by urban and rural usage. Our equipment rental program, for example, our poultry processor is out all over the place, all over the county, all over the time. Urban backyard, couple of chickens, to a small farm that's doing 100 or 3 in a weekend. So and similarly with our K-12, it's both urban and rural schools, and our habitat programs. A lot of those take place on our rural lands, but we're continuing to increase, our support for more urban stormwater issues. So but the people that facilitate them, are facilitating them across the county because it's their expertise type. The public user component isn't what is, we don't have a specific urban habitat person and a rural habitat person, but we do have somebody who is proficient in stormwater, as an example. So I think from that component, it makes sense to keep us, sort of co-housed.
With regard to that, I think we don't need to think we're going to be stasis. I think we need to think 5 years out, what we're going to look like, what we want to look like, 10 years out, 15 years out. I don't think the snapshot of today may not be applicable then.
Yeah, I mean, I think our preference.
And I would add the colleges to the education component as well.
Yeah, and I think at this point, we're assuming a single facility, but as we go through this feasibility analysis, it may be that we can't find everything we want at one place, in which case we might have to revisit that and go a different direction.
Yeah.
Okay, I think Sarah says she has what she needs, and cognizant of the time, I'm going to suggest we just move on from this topic for now and go back to the next item on our agenda. If we can get that up, Sarah.
Yes, I am pulling that up. Here's a shot of the agenda, and I'll get that topic list.
Great. So yeah, next up is our draft topic session list for the July work session. Here we go. Okay. Staff presentation, as we always have, a couple sets of minutes to look at. Looks like a couple of resolutions on cost share and cooperator labor rates. As we mentioned earlier, the mid-year, let's change number 5 if we could to mid-year budget review. So we're real clear about that. The advisory committee, which we talked about tonight, continuing our conversation on the Conservation Education Center, salary study, community awards program, which we talked about at our last session and asked staff to come back with some additional information on. And then, of course, our old friend COVID, which is always on our agenda. Seems like a long but doable topic list for our work session. Are there any other items board members or staff want to put on or take off from this list at this point?
Yeah, this is Doug. I'd like us to talk either at the work session in July or maybe the work session in August about potential resolutions to take to WACD. We could do it during a regular board meeting, I suspect.
Doug, is there a hard timeline on when you think we need to have taken action at our level in order to be a player in that discussion?
Yeah, I think by mid-August.
Okay. So maybe
I don't know when the area meetings are going to be. That's when we have to present those to the rest of the group.
If I could jump in.
I think we can let it slide for a bit.
Yeah, in terms of timeline there, I think that's a really important piece to bring up, Doug, because that conversation historically has taken place at the August board meeting. It might be good to have a short 5-minute conversation about if there are any known resolutions that any of the board is interested in putting forward, at the July work session, noting that the August work session will be canceled. So just so that those ideas can start to percolate, typically we've approved them both at our August and our September board meetings. Area meetings, as Doug mentioned, do fluctuate. They are usually in the first couple weeks of October. And so that deadline of the September board meeting has historically been sort of our hard and fast deadline for getting those approved.
Well, given that, I would suggest that we at least have a short conversation to see if there's any interest in resolutions at this July work session. And then if there is, figure out our timeline for drafting and acting on those in accordance with those, so that it's done by the area meetings.
And we're having a WACD executive committee meeting in the morning. So I can ask the question then, when is the Southwest area meeting going to happen? Which they probably won't know, but that can maybe push the button.
Okay, great. Okay, so with that addition, we have a draft topic list for the July work session. Of course, we can continue to change this up to the time we start that meeting. So we'll go with that for now and move back to item 11. The next item on our agenda, which is supervisor reports. And I'll just go around. We'll start with the first person I see on the screen here. Doug, do you have anything?
No, I do not.
Thank you. Betsy?
No.
David?
Nothing tonight.
Helen?
I don't either.
Okay.
It's unanimous.
Not unanimous. I have a one quick just heads up for y'all. The Olympia Farmland Group we've been working on has one more meeting scheduled on July 5th. where we're going to come up with our recommendations to take to the city's land use committee on July 15th. I got together with Council Member Madrone earlier this week, and she and I brainstormed how we want to present that to the committee on the 5th, as well as the City Council committee on the 15th. And without spilling too many of the beans, one of the main thrusts of what I think we'd like to be recommending is that our ad hoc committee that's been working on this for a year needs to become a more permanent committee with broader representation and a direct line of advisoriness to the city council. So because there's going to be a lot of issues that we have not fully fleshed out by the time we go to the city council committee in July. And we're, at least Danny and I are thinking that if we could get a committee which includes everybody who's been working on this, plus some additional people to the table, with the goal of having solid budget-related recommendations for the City of Olympia at about this time next year, so it can inform their 2023 budget development process. That's kind of the timeline we're heading on here. So the work we've been doing for the last almost year now is kind of coming to I won't say a stopping point, but it's coming to a check-in point where we'll really have a better sense of where we go from here and how serious the council is about this topic by the middle of July. And that's all I have to report.
Thank you.
That takes us to your report. Sarah, Executive Director report.
Yeah, I'll keep this brief as well. 2 items for you this evening. One is just a bit of housekeeping. Staff has been working really diligently as we're closing out one state, not just fiscal year, but biennium ending June 30th. So completing projects and deliverables, as well as wrapping up all of the necessary paperwork and documentation for those pieces. The staff presentation at the July work session is going to be a great showcase on a lot of the cost share projects that were implemented this last biennium. And due to a lot of the complexities in some of our ESA listed species and associated regulations, it's been a process to work through and implement some even seemingly simple cost share projects. And I just really want to hand it to our staff who has worked so diligently with our community members, as well as with the commission and our local permitting office and state and federal regulatory agencies. And we've been able to implement some really great pieces and have some really grateful community members because of it. I'd love to get the board out on another site tour with some of our cost share recipients that implemented a lot of practices this biennium. They just have overwhelming gratitude to express. They'd love to meet the board and host and do sort of a property tour there. So look for another site opportunity to see what we've done in more of a suburban and agricultural setting. So that's a really interesting one. And so thank you guys for participating in our other project tours with the Skookumchuck and such. I've really appreciated your feedback and your insights, and the board sort of information and scoping questionnaire that I sent out. Some of those are starting to come in as well. And I've really, really enjoyed reading them. And some of them include things that I know to be true and I've heard before, and some of them include a lot of new things too. So yeah, they're really helpful, and I appreciate that. And just another plug for those if you feel so inspired. On a different front entirely, there's a couple of conversations that are coming out of the Thurston County Agricultural Advisory Committee. One again is around support for agricultural infrastructure needs. This has been a reoccurring conversation at the district for many, many years. You know, we've been involved in joint needs assessments with WSU Extension and other community members for quite some time. The need and opportunity for local slaughter and processing facilities for livestock is one of those that's sort of at the top of that list. There was a bill that did not pass in the legislature this year, but you might remember was included instead as a budget proviso for the Washington State Department of Agriculture to work with the Conservation Commission to create a grant program for districts or potentially other entities to help increase access to livestock processing. So that's a conversation that our local ag committee is very interested in, something I'd love to talk with the board about more in depth about what the opportunities as part of that program might look like, some of the existing models that are currently out there with local conservation districts, and really what role and how TCD might be able to help support this. There's a huge barrier to for especially small to mid-sized livestock producers. So, you know, urban, suburban, and even some more rural folks to access, again, those types of processing facilities. So it's a huge component for regional food security, just as well as agricultural viability. There's also, I sent an email earlier today that's somewhat related, that the Board of County Commissioners is reviewing a variety of budget considerations, but there's some sort of economic relief and community support funding due to COVID, and they're looking at how to allocate some of that. Staff has proposed a recommendation to allocate, I believe it's around $2 million to that local food security and production, and some economic relief for local farms that are still suffering from some of those pieces and the impact of the pandemic. So there's, again, more information in your email, but I'd encourage you to look at that as the Board of County Commissioners is having conversations. This topic aligns a lot with our strategic goals, both around working lands preservation, also around agricultural viability, and food production and security. So that may be a topic area for the district to provide some thoughts or comments about needs. And Stephen Bramwell at WSU Extension has been aggregating a lot of those pieces since then, and I included that, his sort of initial analysis in that email for you to consider and take a look at.
There, a follow-up on that. I read Stephen's email earlier today, and it seems like this is a very tight timeline, and that the Board of County Commissioners is going to talk about this next week. So I don't think we as a board can take any action on this, but I would be quite comfortable, and I'm checking with my colleagues here, I'd be quite comfortable asking Sarah to write something up to get to the board before that meeting that would support the direction Stephen is suggesting, and essentially say that the things that are in our strategic plan are things that are worth investing in with this money.
I concur.
Is that okay with the board? And is it okay with Sarah? Is it okay with you if we ask you to weigh in on that on our behalf?
I would be more than happy to do so.
Okay, hearing no objection, thank you, Sarah, for taking that piece on. I do think it's useful to get into the conversation.
Absolutely.
Okay, folks, with
Sarah,
that,
you mentioned in your report,
go ahead,
I wish this thing had a hand raise thing on it. Sarah, you mentioned in your report that Jennifer Bois had a tool for evaluating governance on the board. I'd like to have a look at that.
Yes, absolutely. I can send out a link to that as well as the recording of her presentation of it too. She shares just a lot of feedback about how her board has used the tool as well as sort of an introduction to it. I think those links will be sent out from Wade shortly. So I'll make sure that you get a copy of the tool itself as well as that sort of presentation.
Thank you.
Great. So with that, the next item up here is our executive session. We're going to move into an executive session to discuss the performance of our executive director. This is permitted under RCW 42.30.110G. We will be taking no action in the executive session. The executive session will last no more than 20 minutes. At the end of the executive session, we will come back into this public meeting for a brief report out and the adjournment of the public meeting. We all received earlier this afternoon a link from Susan that will take us to that executive session room. The only people participating in that executive session will be board members. And so with that, if everybody...
I just have one comment, if I may make, before I leave, and that is that the Evergreen State College now has a new college president. It's the gentleman who was the assistant director since nobody took on the job that was interviewed. He's a fairly young fellow. I think some of the goals towards sustainability also are complemented by what's going on with the TRPC's retreat this year in July, which is dealing with values. And I'm sure they're going to talk about sustainability as some of that. So I urge the Helen and our representatives to attend that if they can.
Oh yeah, yeah, I'll be there. Don't worry.
Great.
Yeah.
Thank you, and you guys have a good rest of your meeting.
Thanks, Chris. I was also just reminded that actually Susan Shelton will be in our executive session because she's the host of our executive session. So with that, folks, go ahead and close out from this meeting. Open Susan's link for executive session, and we'll start there in just a minute.
This conference will now be recorded.
Okay, welcome back, everyone. The board just concluded an executive session discussing the performance of our executive director, permitted under RCW 42.30.110G. We had discussion, we took no action, and we made no decisions in that executive session. This brings us to the conclusion of our public board meeting this evening, and I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
I so move.
All motion to adjourn.
I think Betsy got in first with a motion, and we'll take David's as a second. Roll call vote. Betsy?
Aye.
David?
Aye.
Ellen?
Aye.
Doug?
Aye.
And chair votes aye. We are now adjourned. Thank you all for a productive meeting tonight. Stay cool this weekend. It's going to get a little toasty out there, it sounds like. So be safe.